Hey guys, I'm Amaroth, and one of the questions I have asked myself is it possible to build caves in Nugget? Well, as you can see, it kind of is. I have built several caves in Nugget by using just terrain and M2s. And I would like to share my experience with it, give you some tips, and explain why this isn't actually a good idea. Well, first of all, if you want to build similar cave, you can't build it beneath the terrain. It won't really work, your models will flicker and so on. So you can't do something like this beneath an actual terrain, beneath an actual zone. So the first thing to do is create some sort of separated ADTs like I have done here and build a cave there and just create a teleport. So here's my main zone, and there would be a portal like here somewhere which would get player here and back. Portal or well, any sort of teleporting script, smart IE and so on. That's the first thing. You need to build something like this in different zone and teleport your players. The second thing is what I have done in this particular cave, and it was a very poor idea, is that not just walls and ceiling but floor as well are built out of M2s. Well, there is a big problem with this. Server-side maps are there to tell NPCs to walk on terrain or on WMOs, but they will just tell them to avoid walking through M2s, or they will attempt to do so. It doesn't really work flawlessly, but you get an idea. So, if you have work like this, NPC would try to go around it, but if you've got work like this, well, NPC would still try to avoid it. This won't tell NPC to go over it. If you place rock like this and tell NPC to go from here, for example, here, it would just fall down. It would just go like this. Let's spawn Hugo here. If Hugo was an NPC, we would wish him to go like this over that rock, but it won't happen. He will just fall down like this, and he would keep walking over a terrain only, and he would end up here instead of here. Okay, so that's what happens actually. So when we are building caves, my number one tip and the most important tip is to always use terrain as your cave floor. The second thing is that NPCs in general are, well, or server-side maps in general are quite a little bit poor when it comes to avoiding M2s, especially masses of M2s like this. So it's quite likely that if you build cave like this, well, we've got a terrain used as floor, so that's okay, but still these caves are turning. Well, there are turns, which means that if NPC is behind a corner, it is still quite likely to go through those M2s. It doesn't have to happen very often, but it will still be happening. So the second tip from me is to actually use terrain as walls as well. So I would recommend you to just, do something like this. You just build a cave like this, and keep having terrain as floors and as walls as well. This obviously doesn't look very good, so I would toy around with textures a little bit more, and I would spawn M2s there to make ceiling. Well, this will work very well when it comes to game mechanics, because NPCs want to go through those walls and they won't fall through floor. So this will kind of work, at least to some degree. Well, it still won't be very perfect, but it is at least something, so you can build cave like this. Then you would spawn M2s into walls to make those walls look a little bit better, and those walls will still make or prevent NPCs from going through them. What this doesn't work very well for are, you know, oh, I can't remember the word now. What was that? I've completely forgotten what I wanted to say. Rooms. Okay, rooms was the word. For example, let's say that we've got an NPC here and player here, and this is within aggro range. Okay, so this NPC sees, there's a player, I want to attack him, and there's aggro, and there's combat, and that NPC is trying to get that player and is attacking him. And the question is, what do actual fuck, guys? There is huge wall which is separating this part of cave from this part of cave, and yet NPC which is behind that wall is trying to attack our player. It is trying to get to him. And this wouldn't very happen in WMO cave, because WMO cave would be separated into different rooms, and NPCs would attack only player which is in the same room or which is in front of entrance to that room. Okay, and this doesn't really work here. So that's another thing, and you can't really solve this at all. The only thing you can do is avoid having such thin walls and have all walls at least, like, I don't know, 20 or 30 yards wide. That's really the only way of avoiding this happening. So is this possible? Well, it is, kind of, but it's hard and it's buggy. It won't really work. So I wouldn't really encourage you to make such a cave. It's really tedious and it doesn't really work very well. Especially if you want to build your own dungeon or raid or any sort of instance. This is definitely a very bad idea. Well, if you happen to build any such cave anyway, you still at least should try to make use of all tips I have provided in previous tutorials. Well, the first thing definitely are contrasts, and the second thing are stories. Well, I need to find an entrance. Okay, so let's get to it. Here's our cave. And any general reasons for exploration and so on. So when we are in our cave here, here's an entrance, player will be teleported here. Well, here's a very narrow passage, and I would advise you to use a very dark, dense fog in here. So I have, for example, I have used fog from, not from Darkshire, from Duskwood. And in Duskwood there is a cemetery and there is a house, and around that house is very dense purple fog. And I've used this purple fog here in this whole cave, or near a whole cave. So here you've got very narrow passage. There's an alternative way, there's a dead end actually. And it just opens and there is a huge roomy area here. So this is kind of contrast where you've got very narrow space and then you've got suddenly huge open space. Yet another thing about contrast is, well, this sort of light. Here's a hole in ceiling, we've got light protruding through it like this, and again, if here was a fog, it produces quite a cool effect. When it comes to telling stories, well, abandoned old caves are really good for that. For example, this sign. It has been knocked aside. Well, by who? Let's take a look. Here's a minecart which has knocked the sign aside, and here's actually a dead man who was riding that cart, and he's here. So he has apparently died. As you can see, he has even legs beneath that cart, so he couldn't get away from that. So that's a little bit cruel story, a little bit gruesome, but there's the second sign. There are two signs next to each other, which has ended up here. And this is a story which is just here for players who are exploring our caves. And we take a look here. There is another example of contrast. Well, mushrooms. And they are light, and they have actually, I think, some particle effects or some lights or something like that. So there would be a really dark, dense fog, and in that fog you would just see those lights. And I had actually NPCs here as well. I had monsters from Zangarmarsh, those fungal monsters which have lights again on them and so on, particle effects, and those look very, very good in dark areas. If you have played Skyrim, there are great examples of these effects when you have a very dark cave and very bright light things in that cave. By the way, there's another thing to note here. There's an alternative way. You've got one way here, you can go over these rails, or you can jump down here by taking this path here, and you can get down here, and those two caves actually meet later. So there are two ways of going through this dungeon. So making multiple alternative ways is something which can be quite nice because it gives players room for making decisions. They can make choices. Again, example of contrast: dark area with lit candles. A tiny little story just for fun. This just when I saw this dwarf, I was just like, okay, let's stick his head into ground. You can make just small Easter eggs like this, because why not? That's what this is about. Going next, again, another contrast. Lava in dark cave. There's a dense fog everywhere, you can't see a thing, and suddenly there is this area where fog was not present, so you went through from narrow cave to opened area. Fog has suddenly disappeared and you can see lava down here. So again, a contrast. You are in some sort of feeling and then something suddenly changes. Contrasts are very good. Yet another space. I've got these models aren't original. They are for some reason are replaced by those models. I don't even know where are they from. What happened here? Anyway, another things I've toyed around a little bit with. So yeah, those are just few ideas about building caves. Yet another contrast here. All those are live in game and so on, so you can actually see them very well, and they pop up in front of you from fog. So really, contrast, telling stories, uh, keeping game mechanics on your mind when you are building caves like this. So make sure that you've got terrain as your floor, that your walls are of raised terrain as well, so your NPCs won't just go through those walls. And in general, if you can, build caves out of WMOs. Either create your own WMOs or use WMOs for building those caves if you have any at your disposal, because that will just work much better when it comes to server side maps. Anyway, if you can't build a cave, well, if you can't build WMO and want to have some sort of custom cave, I would really advise you to at least try to use Blizz-like caves. All those Blizz-like caves, there's huge variety of them. There's huge, well, you can choose out of many caves. There are dozens of them, and you can put them together. You can even connect them by teleports between each other. You can change their textures, you can uh, change their due sets, whatever. You can do many things which are different than this, and they will work better. This is just tedious, hard to do, and I would say it isn't really worth it. I kinda regret building this cave like this because it just never worked. We could use this for role playing and so on, but really, that was all. Yet another example of contrast. There's again cramped, narrow cave. You go here and then suddenly fog is gone, and there is this huge open area and some colored crystals and lit lamps and so on. Again, yet another example of uh, contrast being used. There are some people. I've actually made my own basilisks here, and those are again models of people which met with those crystalline basilisks. I have even used this stone texture to match that. So all those things are really good. Well, try to make your models blend with each other and to try to have things which make sense in general in any kind of environment you are building. So that was just a well, I hope not too long walkthrough through my cave I have built before. And like I said, I would advise you to avoid building such cave. And if you are building similar cave, if you want to use M2s for building your cave in a no cave without using WMOs, without creating your own WMO in a 3D application, well, at least try to keep those game mechanics in your mind and make that cave as unbuggy, I would say, as possible. So those were a few tips about caves, a few notes, my personal experience with them. I hope this was useful for you guys, at least to some extent. Thanks for watching and happy modding.